if hope dies, like society just doesn't progress, everything stops. The thing for me is how much good, positive change can I bring to the city in the time that I've got? And that's actually quite exciting.
Hi, I'm Laura Nielsen and welcome to Hope in the Deep End. We've put together this podcast to inspire us all to keep working in areas of deprivation and poverty. We're sharing best practice, stories, outcomes and some interesting thoughts and ideas. So whether you're working in primary care, secondary care, the charity sector or any of the other myriad of roles, please listen and help us to keep each other inspired. Welcome to Hope in the Deep End podcast. I'm Laura Nielsen and I'm here with Bev Craig, who is the leader of a great city, Manchester City Council. And we're going to be chatting about all things leadership and hopefulness as we explore what it means to have hope in the deep end. Welcome, Bev. Do you want to start by just telling us a little bit about yourself, for people who don't know who you are, and how on earth did you end up in this role in politics?
Well, I mean, it's a question I probably ask myself most days. So I'm Bev. I was first elected as a Burnage Councillor in 2011, which means that I am in fact older than I look. Lots of water and good skincare is probably the key. But I became leader in 2021. Before that, I'd been the cabinet member in Manchester for health and care, so I'd seen the city through the pandemic, led on our community as well as our health and care response, done things like health and care integration, social care reform, all of that. And when my predecessor, Richard, after 25 years of running the city, stood down, I thought, do you know what? I'd like to give that a bit of a crack. I'm not from a political family. I didn't grow up in politics. I guess kind of a kid from a council estate where doing GCSEs was novel. So first in my family to finish school, never mind go to uni. And yeah, I mean, it's a brilliant job and it's a tremendous privilege and something I wake up every day. And yeah, it's a big job, but I love it.
So do you remember when you first decided to stand for election? And kind of what was that about? Was it adventure? Was it frustration? Was it like...
I mean, it's been an adventure, but no, I think... So I grew up in Belfast, born in 1985, so kind of the back end of the Troubles. Saw that time in Northern Ireland as we began to move to whatever peace meant, kind of in a context of Good Friday Agreement. So I'd always been interested in politics and current affairs. But I guess in Northern Ireland, you avoid politics rather than something that you lean all in on. And at the time, it was characterised by sectarianism. Your cultural and national and religious identity would define who you'd vote for. So I didn't do anything to do with politics. Came to Manchester for university, if I'm honest. And some of these people and I are really good friends, but thought that mostly political parties at uni were a bit odd.
Well, they are.
A bit too serious.
Yeah.
I was excited that you could get a pint quite cheaply and that you could go out and have a good night out with cheap food. But I became more politically interested in kind of small p political stuff. So at university, did a lot of anti-racism campaigning, did a lot of LGBT activism at the time, and actually ended up with my first job after graduation in local government as a local government officer. But I think for me, the moment came, it was 2009. So it was the period probably when lots of people were leaving the Labour Party. Yeah. I decided it was the time to get involved. And the reason that I did that at the time, in the Northwest, Nick Griffin was standing for the BNP. And I sort of thought, I'd been active through Unison, my trade union at work. At that moment, I kind of thought, do you know what? If you've got opinions and you've got views, kind of there are some things that are worth fighting for. So took the time to do a bit of research and decided that the Labour Party was for me. And as often the case in political parties at the time, I was like 24, 25, stuck out like a bit of a sore thumb in some of those rooms that I was going into. And I looked around, even in a city like Manchester, and I saw at the time kind of a council that was led predominantly by councillors that were older white men. Didn't really see that many kind of younger people or people kind of speaking authentically around what life was like, kind of from my generation. So decided that maybe it'd be something I'd give a bit of a go. And yeah, got elected in 2011. And look, if you'd have said to me in 2011 that I would have been leader of the council, I probably wouldn't have believed you. But here we are.
So you became leader, which is amazing. And I can imagine you being like super proud, but then potentially super scary. I would be quite nervous, I think. And particularly taking over from Sir Richard, who's quite different and had that very long legacy and long time. When you kind of, I don't know, do you get like a certificate or a chain of office or a sword or something or anything?
Not really, no.
No.
I mean, I think, so it's interesting, isn't it? I think I've thought about this a lot. I think particularly as women, sometimes kind of the gender norms, and we're taught to be super deferential about it, you know, like, ambition is scary, particularly for a woman, you know, so it's a kind of almost, I was in the right place at the right time. Whereas the reality was that I really wanted to do the job.
Yeah. And you're super talented.
And I realised during COVID, actually, that you could make such a massive difference. You know, this isn't just around the administration of services that do bins and roads. Like, you can literally do things that saves people's lives. And I saw that in COVID. So I think I entered it, yes, with humbleness, and yes, kind of knowing that I had a big job to do. But I think also with confidence and purpose. And I think for me, you know, Manchester's been on an incredible journey. You know, we've taken a city where there's been no economic growth into the beginnings of a modern success story. But we're also a city that's, you know, ridden by inequality, by poverty, by great social challenges. And I felt really strongly that it felt that the next phase of Manchester's chapter had to be one that really focused on its people. And that, yes, you can talk about economic growth, but economic growth high and for who? Yes, you can talk about your growth in your population, but what kind of highs and mix do you need? And I think to be able to begin that sort of social and generational shift around what Manchester is known for was actually quite exciting. You know, and I think you just have to look at what we've done around council and affordable homes. You know, we built more council and social housing last year than at any point since the late 2000s, and we've still got massive waiting lists. So it felt that, yes, there's an element of nervousness where you start on your first day and you think, oh, I hope I don't mess this up. But for me, that there was a clear purpose to what I was trying to do, you know, and as politicians, you're here for as long as you're given by the electorate, you know, so you're always running down the clock, you know, so the thing for me is how much good, positive change can I bring to the city in the time that I've got, and that's actually quite exciting.
That's really exciting. So Manchester has gone through an amazing change. I mean, I think we both probably arrived at similar times in the city at Manchester University. So, and it is completely different now when you walk around, isn't it? That there is always a risk, isn't there, with growth when inequality widens.
Yeah.
And I think particularly the visible signs of that can be housing, can't it? So, you know, in the city at the moment, there's still lots of development going on and exciting tower blocks. And there was an announcement a couple of months ago, I remember on the news, about very posh apartments going up with a very posh hotel and a fancy chef. And
this was a Robert De Niro.
And you kind of look at it and you think, okay, I know on one level the city probably does need that, and that's a real sign of confidence. But when you and I look at the social housing waiting lists and the problems we've seen around homeless families particularly, and how does all that marry up, and how do you as leader try and hold both?
I mean look, and it's one of the constant conflicts and dilemmas that I think any major city leader's got, and I think we've been really clear that growing the economy with some intentionality is, if done properly, what can deliver for people. So what I'm not saying is that Manchester wants to be a model of trickle-down economics. If we just bring a bunch of wealth into the city centre, it'll magic its way into Gorton or into Harper Hay. That's not the model that we subscribe to. But I also think the challenge of Manchester is different to, say, if you look at the economic model in London or in bits of the southeast, where they've had historic wealth. And, their challenge now is how do they redistribute some of the historic wealth that exists. I think Manchester throughout the 80s and the 90s was defined by the absence of any growth. And that what that meant is that it manifests itself in different ways. There was a derelict and dead city centre. There was the absence of job opportunities. But also there was people with money. They just didn't live here. They lived in Cheshire. They commuted in and out. They drove in the big cars, but they didn't live in Manchester. And I think what you see, particularly as you've seen the upper end of the housing market develop in Manchester, is probably exposure to wealth that Manchester's never really seen before. And you go back all the way to our origins hundreds of years ago, from a kind of grotty little mill town that pulled itself up by its boots and decided it was going to be a city. But I think for me, it's about saying, okay, well, what are the things that we can control? And I don't go and talk to residents about economic growth. I talk to them about jobs, I talk to them about homes, and I talk to them about opportunities. In jobs in Manchester, we've created well over 100,000 jobs in the urban core that's benefited all the boroughs across Greater Manchester, and the productivity numbers show that. It benefits the rest of the Northwest, meaning that people don't have to leave, and there's different opportunities for people. But we're intervening in different ways around the jobs market, be that around young people's apprenticeships, but around any contracts that we have. We were one of the first councils in the country around social value to kind of mandate that you had to employ X amount of people, be it things like the Cllr Construction Academy, where we're forcing all of the developers in the city to work in a pool to train up Mancunians to go into those jobs. So we talk about jobs being created. I think the thing on homes is really interesting because we do live in a country where the housing market's broken. And Manchester will never be an apologist for the status quo in that sense. I think that the impact of government policies over the last 15 to 20 years around house building is really bitten. And no more than on social and affordable housing. Because I think, if I was to explain Manchester at the minute versus Manchester when I first became a councillor, in probably late 2011, it was one of my first really complicated cases, where there was a case of a woman who'd come to me. She'd had a leaflet through her door saying that we had an advice surgery on. And for whatever reason, that was a moment that she chose to leave her abusive husband. And the more we look into all this, we always know that there's a little thing that underpins a big thing. She had a choice of 3 different homes in 2011 that she could go to. Because at the time, Manchester had 70,000 council and social homes, and there were bits of the city that we just could not fill. And that was only 15 years ago. Fast forward now to waiting lists of 15,000 people, over 4,700 applications to our homelessness service in a year, and kind of government policy has really hit. So yes, we're building record numbers of council, social and genuinely affordable homes. We've been big proponents around some of the rights that the Renters' Rights Act can bring in, but we don't just accept the status quo. And I think if you start to think about some of that in conjunction with some of the more social measures of the city, it shows that we're often defined by the towers in the city centre, but I want us to be defined about the social purpose of doing whatever it takes to make Mancunian lives better. And that's for me why we're here. And briefly, one example I'd give of that would be Manchester schools. So if you go back in time, Manchester historically, one of the reasons that wealth didn't stay was the quality of our schools. They'd always disappear off to go to Trafford or Stockport. No offence, Trafford or Stockport. But now, for the first time in Manchester's history, our kids are performing at or above the national average. Now, I want it to be higher, I want it to be more, but to have done that without the hundreds of millions of pounds that went into the London Challenge programme in the early 2000s about the quality of our schools, with record numbers that are good or outstanding, that give great levels of value added, and one of the lowest numbers of NEETs, not in education, employment, training young people, that's the kind of story that I want Manchester to be known for, not just some TikTok influencers set up a tower having a nice time.
Looking at a good view.
Yeah, look, it's a lovely view, coming in on the tram in the morning, beautiful. But Manchester's not about the towers. Manchester's about what can we do in the city to make sure that we're leveling that playing field. We're not just waiting for opportunity to fall into people's laps, but we will take a more interventionist role in trying to be able to force people's ways in to have opportunities that, let's be honest, people for generations elsewhere in the country have had.
Yeah. And it's really interesting, isn't it, working in inequality. So this podcast is called Hope in the Deep End, and a lot of people who listen to it work in the voluntary or public sector services, where it can feel a bit of a grind. It can feel like, the next data dashboard looks as grim as the last data dashboard. Do you know what I mean? And also you can feel that you're buffeted from all sides, from, big global events to government decisions or random things that happen that change your working environment. You must feel that more than anyone as leader of the city. How do you maintain hopefulness? How do you maintain this sense of purpose, this drivenness? So
you're right, because I think so many of Manchester's challenges have been long-term, they've been structural, and in many of our communities grounded in generational poverty that's limited people's opportunities in the past. I think for me, there's probably a couple of things. The first is that recognising actually real change takes time. We live in a world where, as a politician, I'm trying to explain a complicated thing that we've been doing for 5 years in the first 10 seconds of a video so that somebody doesn't move on.
Yeah.
And it feels that actually kind of we live in a world where actually the most complicated of problems will take a long time to solve. So I think it's recognising that there is always a balance around impatience for the things that need to change immediately and patience around right decisions taken in the long term. I think the example around schools in early years in Manchester shows that, that kind of stuff doesn't get the attention it deserves sometimes. I had an interview with a chap, I'm sure you wouldn't mind me saying, I think it's from The Economist, who interviewed Richard Leese 15 years ago. And he interviewed me probably about 6 months ago, and I was talking about early years. And he's like, Richard, your predecessor, he banged on about this as well. And I was like, well, yes, but if you're going to change the life course of a family, you have to work with the family for a generation. So some things take time. The second thing for me is what are the things that you can change quickly and make a difference, and how do you celebrate the wins? Yeah. So, the young people is a long-term example. But homelessness in Manchester is probably one of the biggest challenges that we face, and something that you can't change overnight, but celebrate the wins where you find them. When we said that by 2023, we didn't want any families in B&Bs, the very bare minimum for a society like the UK. But at the time, the conventional wisdom said that we couldn't do that in Manchester because every local authority was using B&Bs. Looking at my dashboard last week, we have had 6 families over the last 3 months that have had to be used in B&Bs for less than 48 hours. So that's a win. It might not feel like it in a world that you're trying to fix all the hard stuff. Or it might not feel like it in a world where figures nationally have gone up by a third of families living in temporary accommodation. But in Manchester, we've managed to get them down from 3,500 to 2,700. So incremental wins. And then the third thing, I suppose, is that if hope dies, society just doesn't progress, everything stops. And I was reminded of that really starkly. So in 2022, we took the decision that we were just going to celebrate young people in Manchester. We had a lovely branded 2022, our year, where we went out and we spoke to tens of thousands of young people. And I remember a young lad, must have been 10 or 11, so just finishing primary school. I'd come and I'd done my spiel, got grilled by a bunch of kids that give me a much harder time than anyone in the council chamber ever does. And this young lad puts his hand up and he's like, look, if you're not hopeful, what chance do we have? Yeah. We need the grown-ups to tell us what there is to be happy and hopeful about, so we need you to be hopeful. And if you're getting schooled by an 11-year-old on hope, you can't lose sight of that. And I think it kind of, to me, it sort of gets a bit into the spirit of Manchester. I know the problems that we've got, But no Mancunian's ever going to thank me for going on a national or international stage and saying, oh, we're all a bit poor and it's a bit grim. Like, they want an image of something can be better as long as you can back it up with the fact that you are actually making it better.
And a pathway, don't they?
Yeah.
So there's so much great about Manchester, isn't there? You know, culturally, sporting, economics, business. There's amazing stuff that's brilliant about Manchester, and also there is problems, and you can hold two truths at the same time, can't you?
But I also think, like, so growing up, I thought we were normal, right?
Yeah.
I thought we lived a very, very normal life. I thought every kid took food home from the Harvest Festival. And I thought every kid got presents from the church in hampers, because I thought the church was just dead good at giving out food.
Yeah.
What I didn't realise is that by all conventional standards, we were poor.
Yeah.
And we would be in some indicator, would be in a hard to reach category, you know, mum and dad kind of in and out of work, everybody on benefits. You know, we would be categorised as one of those kind of problems in society. But we were in a family that felt part of a proud community. So I think that really influenced my lens around how you think about some of this stuff and how you talk about it. Because people without much money would never self-define themselves as being in poverty. So I think that also speaks to how you speak about people's problems. And if you just define people by the problem as you see it, rather than seeing the strengths that they have, like actually some of the most resilient people I know
are phenomenal.
Are those mums without money that can make it to 4 different community events, and they've just scored 4 hot meals and they run up to Christmas for the kids and got some Christmas hampers. Like, they're resilient and they're really sharp. So I think there's, for me, a really important worldview as to how you look at problems as complex as poverty.
And it's interesting, what are we trying to fix and why?
Yeah.
So, you know, the mums that I see living in temporary accommodation when we're doing our work are genuinely more skillful parents than I am. Because I have a lot more shortcuts and I have a lot more easy wins, and they're also hugely resilient. So, you know, I get slightly annoyed if, you know, I get a parking ticket and it doesn't actually massively affect my life. It's irritating and it's annoying, but my, you know, brain goes, and, you know, and their daily.
That's it. You go to Tesco and there's no red milk. Oh my God.
Yeah, terrible.
You know, the reality is for so many people.
Yeah. And I think I'm always inspires the wrong words, but that sense of hope, I find hope when I go and see these amazing women who are doing everything they can to do the best family life they can do. So it's interesting, isn't it, how we see, and definitely in the health world, they're on a dashboard, glowing red. And, you know, and we've just finished the end of the year in the joy of primary care, and you have to go and you go and track people down, and they're just, most people are really actually quite beautiful and kind, aren't they, underneath?
And I think that's it. And I think one of when I first got involved in politics, I felt like I really had to fit in. Maybe the people that I knew that were successful tended to be white, middle-class men that spoke and behaved in a certain way.
A nice grey suit.
And it probably wasn't until I was doing the health and care stuff, actually, that I became so frustrated by the world that I ended up leaning on my own personal experience to try and tell stories. And I remember it was around about the time where we were trying to make the case. It's a bit niche if you're not in the ins and outs of NHS reorganisation. But, you know, the good old days of CCGs and all of that. And I was trying to make the case around integration and why the system's so complicated. And, you know, politicians are known for exaggerating and, you know, making a story sound good. But in the end, I'd stood up and I'd told this hypothetical family story of kind of mum, dad and 3 kids. And, you know, I talked about mum, you know, she's got maybe 6 different healthcare professionals and a separate social worker in her life. You know, dad with his 3 and his mental health practitioner and his social worker. You know, kind of daughter with her kind of addiction issues and issues around bipolar with her own, you know, I think 4 health professionals there. You know, the younger sister, kind of mild learning disability. Again, her own mental health worker and social work interference, back and forward. And then kind of the young grandson autism diagnosis, his own social worker, and you tot it all up. Everyone's got a different social worker, different mental health practitioner. And, I think I counted at one point for this example of kind of 37 different ways this family interfaces. And you could see them looking at me, typical politician, exaggerating a story for her own points. And I was like, well, actually, I said they had 3 daughters. I was daughter number 1. And you could just see the room change. And I think that probably for me, about how you make it about the person, not the interface with the system, probably then started to give me the confidence to say, well, actually, like I've got maybe something different to offer here than a conventional experience. And you've just got to be, I think, pragmatic that it takes time, but determined that you want to get it on a course to see a bit of change for precisely those people, because systems don't work for them at the minute. They don't see, nobody looks at my sister and sees the tremendous strength that she's got, or the resilience she's got, or her skills and her talent. They see her problems. And we live in a society that defines somebody by their problems, not what's good about them. And I think, if you're to get over some of the historic challenges that Manchester's had around inequality, like all of that has to be shifted on its head as well.
And we could talk all day about integration, and maybe we'll have another conversation about generalism and other of my pet projects, and trying to get whole households seen as a whole household rather than everyone's splintered off. But I think your determination to make a city that works for all the people in the city is really it's really deep. Obviously, it's really profound, isn't it? It's like deep to your core.
Yeah, and I think I don't know. I think I feel this as somebody who came to Manchester. So Manchester's success is built on 3 things, I think, in terms of kind of people. It's that kind of top world-class talent that's attracted from across the globe. It's people that have chosen to come here and stay, and there's people that are born and raised here. And I think in Manchester's pursuit to be kind of a global city, you can't lose sight of the people that were born and raised here at the expense of people that are choosing to come here. And I think, who Manchester's for is a really important question.
That's an interesting question.
Because it has to be welcoming to the world, but at the same time, it's kind of making sure that actually it's my young people in Burnage or Harper Hay or Moston that have got those roots through into those jobs, that don't see new jobs as, they can come and work in hospitality in the city centre. They can come and work for a global gaming company. And that's kind of the bit of who Manchester's for. So my job is to make sure that the city builds the infrastructure that does all of those at the same time. And I think some cities, internationally, not necessarily in the UK, though some in the UK, have taken a choice that says actually you can bring more global talent and keep more students, stop building social and council housing, kind of move those people out. And that's not what Manchester is. So, all of the notions around gentrification actually show me a city in the UK that's got as many social and council housing as we do. It's pretty unprecedented that we've got 70,000 and we're building another 10,000 more. So yeah, there's a fight to be had with the housing market. But I think kind of Manchester, to say that it's for Mancunians isn't a parochial kind of closed door thing. It's more about the energy of what the city's about.
Okay. We need to finish in a minute. If there was one thing that the government could do to make your life easier as a city leader, what would you ask for them? They might say no.
As a city leader. So I think probably separate to what we would ask for devolution. Yeah. But I think for me it's around the structure of a housing market and the rental market. And we need to, the Renters' Rights Act is great.
It's a start.
But it's a start, and we need to really work on what the next step of it is. In a way that's evidence-led and worked. Back to my point at the beginning, I won't just kind of give a gimmicky thing that was tried in Berlin and didn't quite work, but actually proper structural intervention into the housing market just gives people a fair chance.
Yeah. And if there's one thing that your wonderful Mancunians could do to support the city, what would you ask?
Do you know what? For me, I think that we live in a time where there's so much division and so many different forces that thrive on negativity for their own success. So my message is more around backing the city. At a time when national identity can be complicated, what flag you fly when the football's on is one thing. Yeah. But actually being proud of your city and backing your city, I think, is really important. And I think in an era where racism and discrimination is becoming too normalised and prevalent, kind of reminding people that we've got a good thing here. Yeah. But we need everyone to lean in, because Manchester won't be forged by people in the town hall. It'll be what happens in our community. So that kind of message of, if you've got a view, make it hard, get involved, do stuff. Because you don't change the world sitting at home.
No, come and help.
Absolutely. And I think, the final thing is that grab the opportunities. Like, don't see stuff that scares you and you don't do it. Kind of see a change in Manchester and kind of question, well, actually, what will that benefit for me? Because, be that what we're doing in our town centres like Gorton, Wythenshawe, Moston, it's not just development in the city centre. It's around having local people shaping what they want in their neighbourhoods. So, yeah, just be part of it.
Yeah, and like North Manchester, the new hospital, and there's so much going up there, isn't there?
I mean, completely, from council houses in Cllr, new park, £1 billion for a new hospital, Moston Lane, some exciting plans there. There's loads of stuff going on, and I think, it's about imagining what Manchester's going to be like in 15, 20 years' time in a way that keeps its soul, and a way that keeps it authentically Mancunian. It's not a Gales and a Pret on every corner. It's things that work for Manchester people.
And the thousands of community groups and activities and churches and arts groups and music groups, and but that's the fabric, isn't it?
It's what keeps me going. Yeah. So I can have a week where I've got to go to London a bit, and speak to ministers and kind of press the case of Manchester and the broader sector, and then you can come back and go and visit some community groups that just lift you, because they just show you what they're doing, and that's what Manchester's about to me.
So kindness, perseverance, hopefulness.
Absolutely.
And a bit of confidence. And just give it a go anyway.
Yeah, that's the key.
Great. Thank you so much for your time.
No, thank you.
It's been lovely to chat to you.
You too.
And keep plodding on for a brilliantly integrated community city that works for everyone.
No, thank you.
Thanks so much.